Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to give you a full breakdown on the Endgame experience here in Path of Exile 2. There's a lot going on in the Endgame, and some of it's likely to change as, we're currently in early access, but there's an important distinction to make. Like, a lot of people have said, hey, this is a beta, man. Like, things are going to change dramatically. This is not a beta. This is early access. There's a pretty big distinction there. The end game experience as it is right now is pretty well solidified in terms of just how it's laid out and how the progression system works. So you can count on that probably staying the same. But it is early access, so things like balance, drop rates, things like that, sandbox issues, those things will change over time. But basically everything I'm going to talk about today will remain the same and be sort of a timeless video here for those of you who are interested in playing the end game experience post-campaign in Path of Exile 2. So let's dive right into it. I've got an entire list of things written down that I want to talk about, and I've got college football pulled up as well on the iPad so I can stay up to date as to what's going on in these bowl games, because that's also important. Now, I gotta say, Path of Exile is like one of those games that's like, you don't have to be fully immersed. I don't even play with a headset anymore. I'm usually either like listening to Spotify or watching football while I'm grinding through stuff. So not super intensive in that regard, but it is a heck of a grind. So let's talk about what you got to do. So the basic goal in the end game. Let me get to the map device here. So the basic goal here in the end game is to clear your Atlas map. So you're going to be mapping a lot. Look at all this stuff. There's a lot going on here. A lot of maps that I've played across 2 characters and 180 hours into the game. It just keeps going and going and going and loading and loading and loading. But the whole goal here is you want to start clearing these maps, and you need a magical doorknob. So every single node that you see, every single node is a map to clear. But you need a magical doorknob to open these gates, okay? And they're called Waystones. So at base level, when you first get to the end game, it's going to be tier 1 Waystones, all the way up to tier 15. And whatever waystone you use to open the gate into this will dictate what level the enemies are going to be and what level your drops are going to be. All that stuff scales to the level of the waystone, the magical doorknob that you put into this map device to open up these portals, okay? So these waystones, they look like this. There's all different kinds of tiers. I've got 14s, 15s, 11s, 12s, etc. So they're not all the same. Here's one that's just white, right? It's a magical doorknob that will open up a gate to any node I select, any map I select, and force it to be level 10 with no modifiers. But you could then use things like your transmutation orbs, your augmentation orbs to modify these to have their own unique modifiers. Like this one has 71% increased rarity of items found in this area. Oh, that's pretty nice. But anytime you start to have modifiers that are penalties to you, like this one, for example, has players are cursed with enfeeble area and contains 9 additional packs of plagued monsters. Anytime you have modifiers on these waystones that make things more challenging for you, there's a trade-off. You'll note that this one says waystone drop chance plus 100%. So anytime you add these modifiers and it makes it more challenging, there's a payoff that you're going to get more waystones to drop. Waystones are these magical doorknobs. You have to have one in order to open one of these maps, right? So you want to get waystones. They don't drop very often, especially early on. So let me talk about these waystones and how you get them. Now, every time you complete one of these steps in your quest where it says complete 10 tier 1 maps, you need 10 tier 1 waystones to open up these doors. Once you've cleared 10 maps, you will be awarded with 2 skill points to spend in this tree, your Atlas tree. And so you've got a lot of different directions you can go. Here are my recommendations for you. You really want to get, invest in these perks that increase the number of enemies, okay? More enemies means more drops. More enemies means more XP. So the more enemies that are on the map, the greater the chance you have at getting waystones to drop. But there's also these other perks here that are waystone specific. So waystone quantity, I'm going to get all 3 of these. That's 18% chance to find more waystones. Early on, you just need more. That's the first thing you need early in the end game, is you just need more waystones to drop, right? And then beyond that, as you continue to level up, you're going to want higher tiered Waystones. So you want Waystones that are going to drop at a higher tier because you're going to be gate kept, literally, from progressing further in your quest line because you don't have those tier 6 Waystones you need. You're only getting tier 3s to drop and tier 2s to drop. Now, if you have 3 of the same, you could take them to the reforging bench and condense those 3 into 1, and it will escalate it up to the next tier. So if I had 3 tier 6s, I could condense them together to make 1 tier 7. Does that make sense? So that does mean that you need 3 of those to drop those. So you just need more Waystones and you need them at higher levels. So those are the things you want to invest in first. After that, then item rarity also affects the Waystones that drop. So the more item rarity that you have stacked in your skill tree and in your gear, the more likely you are to get Waystones to drop. So that's my recommendation with the skill tree. Start with Waystone quantity. You want more of them to drop. And then move to Waystone quality. You want higher tier ones to drop. That makes sense? Currently, Michigan is driving and they are owning the Crimson Tide. Friggin' love it. Neither here nor there. Next up, I want to talk about one of the most important things that you need to look for as you are grinding. There's a currency in the game. Well, you're not going to think it's a currency. You're probably just going to think it's just something that you use to upgrade your gear. There's exalted orbs, okay? These are, start thinking of these as your bucks, your dollar signs. This is more important than gold. So the exalted orb is sort of the base denomination for trading for gear in Path of Exile 2. So I have done this a ton where maybe this happened to me. I was stuck on tier 6s because nothing higher would drop. I could not get tier 7 Waystones. And I needed to move on to tier 7s because I was leveled up at that point. Tier 6s weren't awarding much XP at all. And by the way, if you die, I think it's at tier 3s and above. 1s and 2s don't do this. But tier 3 and above, anytime you die, it will take like a full 10% of your XP bar away. Don't quote me on the exact percentage, but it's about that much. It's about 10% of all the XP that you've accumulated on your grind to your next level will be stripped away from you, which sucks, by the way. It's a hefty penalty. So you don't want to just sit there and grind lower level Waystones. You want to get to the next tier. Well, in order to do that, sometimes you're going to be forced to go to the marketplace and trade up. You're going to take the exalted orbs that you've had drop. You're going to whisper people on the website, or I think you can even pull this up in game, the marketplace in game. But you're going to say, hey, I need tier 7 Waystones. They're going to say 1 exalted orb, and I will give it to you. They'll whisper you, invite you to their game. You join their game, hit warp to player. You teleport to them. They'll walk up to you. They'll initiate a trade. You'll throw your exalted orb in. They'll throw their tier 7 Waystone in, and then you'll make the trade, and now you've got a tier 7 Waystone. Excellent. Some guys will even, when they whisper you, they'll ask you, hey, how many do you need? Because you've initiated a trade for tier 7 Waystones, they're assuming you probably need 10 of those to progress to the next level. They might ask you, I've got 10. If you want, you can have all 10 of them for 10 exalted orbs, or whatever it is. So, save your exalted orbs. Don't use them unless you absolutely need to, or you have a surplus of them. But otherwise, you want to use these as your currency to buy Waystones when you need them and buy upgrades to your gear when you need those too. Because here's the deal. The end game can be really punishing. We'll talk about this a little bit more later. But your goal really is to plug the gaps in your build. In the campaign, if you've got gaps in your build, not a big deal. You can make it through the campaign, no problem. But here in the end game, it's going to get escalating more and more and more punishing, which means your build needs to be immaculate the higher you get. Now that I'm at tier 15s, I really can't afford to have gaps in my build. I need to have every single slot has to have a purpose and a meaning. So when you're looking at your resistances and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got 80% fire resist and I'm negative 20 frost. It's like, dude, it's time to sacrifice some of the fire and bring up your cold resistance. And so you go to this website, you go to the marketplace, you start to trade up for things that are going to plug the gaps in your build. So your exalted orbs are the primary currency to do that. Save them and use them. Be intentional about finding things that will fill the gaps in your build. Let's move on. Next thing I want to talk about is in your passive skill tree, obviously there's your Ascendancy perks. And these can be challenging to acquire. So what I recommend is in the end game, you really need to focus on getting your last 4 Ascendancy points. Maybe you got your first 4 with your campaign grind. and now you're in the end game, and eventually you're just going to start to cap out on your potential, and you really need to take your build to the next level. And to do that, you need to get your next Ascendancy points in order to escalate your build and elevate your power. So definitely focus on getting these things to drop, right? So you're going to look for your Jin Baryas, and eventually you're going to get some that will say this in yellow text. It'll say, completing this Ascension trial will grant additional Ascendancy points. We want those, so keep those. I think the lowest tier ones might be in, like, here's a 60. Yeah, that one does not grant. I think you can get them as low as level 69. Nice. That will grant additional Ascendancy points. Or around the level 70 mark. So I recommend once you start hitting level 75, level 76, start running some of these Jin Barya Trials of Sekhmet runs at lower levels just to get used to it. But once you use a Jin Barya, it's gone. So be intentional about when you use the ones that say they will grant Ascendancy points, because this matters. If you die, you lose all your honor, you fail that run, that Jin Barya is gone. Now you can go to the website and trade for more of those if you need to. That's fine. But make sure you're keeping an eye out, because they will drop organically while you're just out there grinding your end game maps in the Atlas. One thing I will mention as well, don't get confused while you're grinding. You might be like, oh my gosh, there's all these extra skill trees out there. What are they? How do I get these points? Don't worry about that. Once you hit like tier 14, tier 15 maps, then that's when you're going to start getting these other skill books to drop. So when you fight a boss in one of these maps, he might drop a boss skill point book. And then you consume that book, you read that book, it gives you skill points to spend here. And then you can start saying, okay, well, these bosses are getting easy. My build's too strong. I will spend a point here on this node to make bosses more powerful. And then I will start getting more, better drops from those bosses as well. So these other trees you'll fill out as you get later in the end game. Don't worry about these peripheral ones early on. But eventually, and this is what I want to talk about next, you're going to have these little mini games in your maps. In all of the maps they spawn. And they could be strong boxes. They could be ritual sites where there's like some effigy that you activate and a bunch of enemies spawn. And you kill them, and then you can pay tribute to buy. There's mirrors that spawn, and if you walk up to them, it will queue up like this black and white encounter where a bunch of ads are going to be running around. You could find like a purple hand, and when you walk through it, it queues up this breach, and this purple aura sort of starts to spread out, and then next thing you know, there's 200 enemies on screen. Super cool stuff. But these mini games have different rewards, and you can also build into getting more benefits from these mini games later on in your grind. Now, all the progress you make on your Atlas is shared across all of your characters. So I have two characters. I have a Witch and I have a Ranger, and both of them are in the end game now. I've got about 180 hours into the game, and all your progress is shared. And so is your stash, obviously. So anytime you're getting things like uncut skill gems and support gems and spirit gems, those things are important because you can share those with your other character and help power them through and get them up to speed so they can start, running higher tier maps right out of the gate. Also share your Waystones across multiple characters. So if one of your characters, like my Witch is 75, level 75, level 76, something like that. So a little bit lower than my Ranger. So I make sure to keep like my tier 10 maps, tier 10 Waystones, so that my Witch can run those and level up accordingly without being thrown straight into the fire. And I do want to talk about expectations for your grind. How long does it take to make this amount of progress? Now, like I said, I'm 180 hours into the game, and that's across two characters. So with one character to make it this far, you're probably looking at at least 100 hours to get to this point in the game. It's a grindy game. That's the whole point of Path of Exile, is all about the grind, and the end game especially is really about like raising percentages by just like 5 points, right? You could work all day at grinding just to get a piece of gear that will raise your frost resistance, your cold resistance from 30 to 35, and you'll consider that a good and productive day. And that's just sort of the nature of this game. It's like I said, I'm to the point where, like, even right now, I just watched Michigan get a sack on Milrow and Alabama to try to keep them a one-score game here. This game is kind of like that. You can space out It is grindy, but don't get too overwhelmed by it. It's like, hey, just keep track of where you are on your build, what you need to find. And other than that, I don't even have game audio in anymore. I just sort of space out, listen to Spotify, listen to a podcast, listen to Critical Role, watch a D&D session, watch some football while I play this game. And you can even just stay logged in and sell items too to help with your endgame grind. So maybe you have gaps in your build and you want to have the currency to buy things that'll help progress your character, and what you really need to do is get more exalts. Maybe what you do is you just list a bunch of items from your stash online and you stay logged in while you're watching football, watching TV, watching a movie, whatever it is that you do with your time. Maybe it's doing Sudokus. I do those too. And then you just wait for people to whisper you sell items, and then at the end of an hour, maybe you've got 20 exalted orbs now, and you're like, hey, cool, now I can go on a spending spree and buy a bunch of stuff to elevate my character. Cool. Now, as you're clearing areas, you'll find these things called citadels. Requires Waystone tier 15 or higher. What's that about? Yeah, once you get to tier 15, you're going to start finding these citadels on your map as you're clearing these maps on your atlas. And these have the unique opportunity to present a better challenge for you with the potential of better rewards. So you fight like things like pinnacle bosses, where it's going to be like maybe Count Geonor, right? From the Act 1, he's the final boss of Act 1. Maybe it's going to be the final boss from Act 2 in the campaign, or the final boss from Act 3 in the campaign. And so you're going to have the opportunity to fight these bosses again at a higher difficulty tier with modifiers on them. And you're going to get really good rewards from it. So these can have a potential to be big payoffs, but don't worry if you're like at tier 7 maps and you find a citadel and you're like, I can't go in there. What's that about? That's what that is, okay? Now, let's talk about what you need to be on the lookout for as you're grinding. One of the things that's going to be a big deal is finally finding a belt that has 3 charm slots. In the end game, this is something you want to keep an eye out for. So as belts are dropping, pick them up, take them back, identify them. Because the sooner you get the opportunity to run 3 charm slots on your belt, the better. Because that's a free plus 25% lightning resist, plus 25% cold resist. And you can get also start stacking things like, this is a rarity of items found. You want these, right? And you want as many of them as possible. So keep an eye out for these belts that have 3 slots. You can go buy them online for sure, but they get kind of pricey. I just waited until one dropped for me. And I got pretty lucky, I think, because it's got 3 slots in it. It also has, fire resist and cold resist on it, and max life. So that's just, I didn't have to go buy that. That dropped for me, right? So keep an eye out for these things. It's definitely possible, if not even probable. Wait, do I have room? I do. I'm going to spend an exalt. Boom, now what do I have? 5% charm effect duration. That was a waste of an orb. Not a big deal. But yeah, keep an eye out for one of these to drop. You're also going to want to keep an eye out for gear that goes from, you'll notice prefixes. Prefixes are important. So early in your endgame grind, you're going to have drops that say Advanced Sabatons, Advanced Pathfinder Coat, Advanced Felt Cap. But then you're going to start getting up into the upper 7, maybe like the lower to mid 70s in your level. And eventually, you're going to start seeing items drop that say Expert instead of Advanced. Expert is a tier higher, right? And they have access to higher tier modifiers. So when those things drop, take them back, maybe throw an Orb of Alchemy in a white one. So even just a white item that, let's say you're running an Advanced Felt Cap right now in your build, but then you get an Expert one to drop, and it's just a white tier with no modifiers, bring it back. Maybe throw an Orb of Alchemy in it if you've got a bunch of them. Maybe just use a Transmutation Orb on it to escalate it to the Magic tier and just see if it has some good modifiers. And if it does, now you can be like, okay, maybe I'll throw an Exalted onto it. You know what I mean? And see how far you can take it. Some of the gaps in my build have been filled by a white item that dropped at a higher tier, and I threw some orbs into it to escalate it, to bring it up to par with the rest of my build, and it surpassed something I already had, maybe even something I found online and paid for. So, that, like I said, my belt, that's what happened, right? That's what happened. So keep an eye out for anything that goes from Advanced to Expert. That could be what you need. I know this video is kind of long. There's a lot going on with the endgame, but I just want to wrap up the video with 2 last final points. Number 1, prioritize resistances. Because here in the endgame, you're going to have a lot of modifiers on these maps, right? As the maps spawn, they have their own innate modifiers. Sometimes it's going to be like they do extra cold damage, they do extra fire damage. And so keep an eye on those things, because you may want to swap out your amulets, your charms, so that you go in prepared, because every time you die, it matters, right? Losing 10% of your XP bar, this sucks. And sometimes it comes down to, oh, I got one hit killed by this cold ability, and I wasn't running my cold resistance stuff. Think about it ahead of time. Be like, oh my gosh, there are shades on this map. Let me go ahead and swap in for cold resistance and immunity to being frozen, so that they can't freeze me and instantly kill me, right? That stuff matters. So start stacking resistances. Here I got fire resist, cold resist, fire resist here. Like, start stacking these things so that you have good resistances built into your character. You can check it on your character screen to see where you're at. Oh, great. I did swap off one piece of gear, so I'm at 0 on Chaos, just with the setup for the last map that I ran. I didn't feel like I needed that. I wanted to double down on fire resist. So anyways, that's how that works. And lastly, the end game is all about, it's really all about escalating your build, taking your build higher, deeper, further. And one of the biggest ways to do that, obviously, is by scaling up your skill gems. Every time they gain a level, it's a huge boost in performance. So keep an eye out for skill gems, different ways to escalate them by having things like here on my, for example, on my quiver here, look, +2 to the level of all projectile skills, and I'm running a bow that doubles the effects of my quiver, so it's technically +4. And so that's going to take my Poisonous Concoction here is at level 28 now. Without all my modifiers, I think it's like level 18, right? So, or 19. So stack all these things, because it's really going to matter. This endgame grind is all about escalating your build. And sometimes you're going to need to go online and trade up for items as well in order to accomplish that. And there you go. That is my full breakdown of the endgame grind here in Path of Exile 2. I know it is a lot. Hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully it was informative. Don't feel afraid to invite a friend. Sometimes grinding these maps can be monotonous, and games like this, they are monotonous. Just know that going into it. For some people, you're not going to enjoy the end game at all. You might actually be like, nope. Once I get to the end game, I make a new character. Maybe you want to make one of every character. I think that's totally fine and totally respectable as well. I'll probably get to that point as well. But I think that the campaign is a little bit more engaging and interesting to grind. The end game is repetitive, redundant, monotonous. It's sort of just the way these games are. They're really designed in the end game to be all about the players that really like to see small progression, over time until they snowball it to get something that's like a godly character eventually down the road. Maybe that's not you. Maybe you don't enjoy having your progression grinded to a halt. Just know that's what the end game of this game is. So if that's you, you don't enjoy that, totally fine to just start a new character. Be like, now I'm going to try a warrior and get them all the way through the cruel campaign. You might totally enjoy that. So anyways, that's the end game. Yeah, let me know if you enjoyed this video by leaving a like in the video, as this is the best free way to support the content right here on YouTube, and consider subscribing for additional Path of Exile 2 content. I've done that spiel way too many times. Hey, be warm and well fed, my friends, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.